Browns, they're putrid. They're the worst team in the NFL.
The season, the 2024 season is over.
Lamar Jackson can't win the playoffs. He'll win a third MVP, though, so that's great. Drew Sample is the most important piece of the Bengals offense next year.
Go Joe Burrow. He deserves to be MVP. I wish he was the Browns quarterback. Kind of mean that.
If you're looking for the most reactionary, silly, and unserious show on the internet, then you're home. Live from Hamilton, Ohio, it's Off the Bench by Chatterbox Sports on 1410 ESPN Radio.
All right, everybody, welcome in. This is Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. A little snow, never hurt anybody. A lot of snow, though. Made it a little difficult to get into the studio today, but thanks.
You drove for some reason.
To be honest, it's the first time I've had four-wheel drive. I've been itching to use the truck in weather like this just to see if it worked, and I felt pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. One moment, I thought I was going to get stuck, and then I was like, see, this is what I get. But no, I was able to make it to my office in Kettering at least. But yeah, it's fun weather outside. But no, thanks to technology, we're able to get the show off and running today. Shout out to Casey, Luke, and Tom Brenneman, for jumping on, doing Dialed In before, and now we're off and rolling. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing. Gentlemen, good morning. You didn't have to worry about the weather. We're all just comfortably inside right now where we should be.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think we were explicitly told by those in charge not to drive, and Kenner just decided it was time to go to the studio. But I'm staying at home, haven't shoveled the driveway yet, and it's looking like that's going to be a doozy, because when I came down here to set up for the show, it was still coming down at full speed. So I don't know when it's going to stop. I don't know how much we're going to get, but this is the most snow I've seen in a long time. I've been in Alabama for the winter for about the last 4 years, and even before that, I don't feel like we've gotten this much snow in forever. So it's kind of cool. I might go outside and build a snowman later.
I told Jacob this. I live up on a hill, and our driveway is kind of weird. So we've got two different driveways. We got one driveway that wraps around the house, and it's over 100 feet long. And then I've got my other driveway, which is all gravel. So I can't shovel anything because we'd be there all year long, and with all this snow that's coming down, it would just pile back on top. It would do anybody any good. So we can't shovel. Our cars are trapped. We're stuck in this house. I can't leave if I wanted to. Like, if I needed to leave today, I couldn't leave. I physically couldn't move my car down our hill. So it'll be interesting. I mean, we're going to have to pay someone else. I mean, I guess, Kenner, you have four-wheel drive. If you can just drive a quick hour to my house, maybe we can make it work. We'll just attach one of those things onto your car, and you'll just shovel our entire drive. That's the only chance I have of leaving today.
I have a winch, at least. I could at least, drag your vehicle, to the station, or at least down the hill. But yes, when you said the hill, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I would not be okay with that. But I have family that lives
at the end of the show. At the end of the show, I'll bring my computer around, and I'll see if I can show you what I'm dealing with here.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of things here today. A lot of emotions to kind of pick through. For one, I don't know look, the season's done. What the hell? I mean, I know the playoffs are here, NFL, but our teams are done. The Browns have been done for a couple weeks. I knew it was going to be their final game. The Bengals, we knew the door was cracked open, but the season's done. I feel like that am I wrong in saying that was probably the fastest NFL season in quite some time? I don't remember a season going by that fast before. I feel like we were just talking about that Chiefs-Bengals game from back in week 2. I feel like that wasn't that long ago. Some of these seasons seem to drag on when you get to this point. This one did not. It flew by. We have to talk about Anarumo here in a second. There's a lot of coaches who have been fired that surprised some. There's some coaches that have been retained that have surprised some. So there's a lot to dive into here today, obviously.
Yeah, crazy morning so far. I thought I was about 60-40 that they were going to keep Lou at the end of that Steelers game. And then obviously this morning I had to rush and change a thumbnail about 5 minutes before the show started because the Bengals decided to have some organizational change. And I think this is probably the best possible sign for how the offseason is going to go. This is something the Bengals don't normally do. And it wasn't just Lou. They fired their O-line coach, linebackers coach, and I think that's an empty line coach. I think that's a really, really good start to this offseason, something we didn't necessarily expect the Bengals to do. They don't do this kind of thing very often, and to kick off the offseason after a, uninspiring season by, going a little bit outside of the organizational box that we all operate in when talking about how to fix this team, maybe they're going to continue to operate that way. And I think step number 2, we all agree, is re-signing T. Higgins. But firing Lou Anarumo makes me very, very confident in the way this organization's headed and the mindset Mike Brown has as we move forward.
Yeah, I'll say this. The Bengals just went through one of truly the worst seasons you could go through. I know the record says they finished above 500. Anybody who watched the Bengals this season know that that's probably not an accurate representation of what exactly went on this season. There's Super Bowl odds. There's Super Bowl hopes and dreams in Cincinnati. There's AFC Championship hopes and dreams every single season. There's pressure to be that top 1, top 2 seed in the AFC come playoff time. There's expectations. And when you don't live up to those, it's hard for me to sit here and say, as Joe Burrow, goes on another year of his contract, that there's not even more pressure now not making the playoffs 2 years in a row. It had to happen. You had to show the fan base and you had to show the media that you're a serious organization. I think if you willingly let Luan Anarumo stay in Cincinnati after what transpired this season, his defense being the worst you could even imagine, the worst of all time, letting him stay with the hopes and expectations that this franchise, this team, that the players in the locker room have, it wouldn't work out. It wouldn't work out. I'm not shocked at all by this. I am shocked at least by how swift it came. I thought we'd wait a little bit maybe, and maybe the ownership, Mike Brown and the Blackburns would wait and maybe until we all cooled off a little bit. But I'm glad they did it now. I'm glad we're going to get a head start finding some coaching replacements here and starting the draft process, because there is a lot of work to do. Probably more work this offseason than we've ever had.
Yeah, there's at one point last week I heard you guys say, like, the talks, and I think you and Craig talked about it, Jake, about, did Anarumo save his job over the last couple of weeks? And it kind of felt like it was trending in a direction where maybe none of those guys were going to lose their job. Obviously, Zack Taylor, I think we were pretty confident, wasn't going to lose his job. Pitcher, we don't even mention him. There's no reason to. The offense did what it was supposed to. And, Anarumo's name got brought up for a while, but it's like at the end of the day, they started playing better down the stretch. But at the end of the day, I always felt confident that some names were going to move, because I don't think you could vastly underachieve the way the Bengals did this year and just move on into the offseason and next season as if that didn't happen. So heads were going to roll. But at the end of the day, obviously Anarumo had to answer for the defensive struggles. But at the same time, was this an Anarumo issue, not getting the most out of this defense? Or is this one of those, the ingredients were there, they just need to go get the right chef? Obviously, this team's going to look different next season. I think they're going to add to this defense, no doubt. But did Anarumo, was there meat left on the bone? Did this defense have more to it and he just not push the right buttons? Or is this a roster issue? Did it matter that they moved on from Anarumo? Could they regret moving on from Anarumo if it's all said and done? Because if they add defensive pieces and they look better next year, is it because they moved on from Anarumo, or is it because they moved on or they added pieces? That's going to be the big question I have. This is a guy that was in the not running, but was constantly mentioned to get a head coaching job not even 2 years ago, and now is just straight up let go by the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm not saying it was the wrong decision. Somebody had to answer for the struggles this year, but man, oh man, that's going to be interesting to see if Anarumo was the problem or if it was the roster at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think, funny enough, the thing that did Lou Anarumo in was the defense playing better towards the back half of the year. When we put the young guys in that he refused to play, they took a step up. When the players like Mike Hilton, Von Bell, the leaders of this defense, said Lou Anarumo simplified the play calls, dumbed down the coverages, and everyone started to play better, I think when most people, myself included, were pointing to that as, oh, this defense is coming into their own, maybe Lou's saving his job. Now with hindsight after they fired him, I think that was proof that early in the year he was stubborn, wasn't willing to adjust his system to his roster, to the pieces he had. And once he finally did, this defense took a step up to a point where if they were playing at the point they played at for the last 5 weeks all year, this Bengals team's in the playoffs. And we don't have an obituary today. We're talking about, going to Buffalo or even higher on the list in terms of seeds in the wild card This defense was terrible all year long and then up above middle of the pack for the last 5 weeks. So I think that, though we thought it was Lou saving his job in the moment, I think that was a pretty big indictment on him, that he wasn't willing to play guys like Jordan Battle early in the season. Even the injuries we saw to DJ Turner and Dax Hill, those guys were shoved down the depth chart earlier in the year. And when they came in, they started to shine. So I think Lou, as the season progressed, we started to see that though there are roster problems, there are player personnel problems with this defense, he was a problem as well. And when you can't fire 11 guys, all 11 players, then you fire the DC. And it seemed like a pretty easy solution to me. I expect Luan Anarumo to be hired by the end of the offseason, I would say pretty quickly. I think he's going to be a DC next year, no doubt, and I think he'd be one of the first names off the market. I think he's highly respected in the league. We saw what he's done when he had high-end talent on that defense, and when he did, he was one of the best DCs in football, so especially in high-leverage moments, and he's great in the red zone, and that's what championship teams value. So I think he's going to get hired somewhere else, and I think he's going to do a damn good job, and we might look back on this and say it was a mistake, but I think that you had to make a change. We know that Zack Taylor's not going to get fired. We know 11 positions on defense aren't going to get fired. So you got to move on from someone, change the message in the locker room, and naturally that's going to be Lou. Was he a scapegoat? Maybe. But was he the best one we had? Probably. So I think it makes sense to fire him. It's time for a change. And I think how this move gets viewed comes down to who the Bengals hire. And I don't know if we want to get into it now, but I certainly have a short list already for guys I want.
Yeah, I don't think Kinner brought up the fact that, like, was the defense talented enough no matter what? Like, could a better defensive coordinator come in here and made the changes? Probably, maybe. I don't think he was fired because of the lack of, talent on the defense. I think he was fired because of what Jacob just said. When you fail twice in a row with a healthy Joe Burrow, someone's going to leave. It's just a fact, and that's to maybe keep pressure away from the head coach, Zack Taylor. But somebody was going to answer for this. And Lou Anarumo, you can't look at this season and say he did anything that was worth a damn. And it sucks because I don't think he's a bad coach. I truly do think that the defensive inefficiencies go beyond coaching. Missing tackles is something that's taught so early on. Wrap a guy up. Like, right. You can only go out and practice and say, "Hey, Geno Stone, don't be afraid to get in the gap and make a tackle one time, make a play." Jermaine Pratt, please make a tackle. You can't like enforce that these are grown men, professional athletes. They need to know better, and at some point, it goes beyond what the coach can do. Saying that, I do think there are things that the coach can do, like not let Sam Hubbard play an entire season on a broken foot, broken hand, broken wrist, broken collar. Like there's things that you can do where the defense won't look as terrible. And I don't think Lou did enough this season to warrant not being the scapegoat. He is 100% the scapegoat of this season. There is zero doubt in my mind that that's why he was fired. He was not fired because he was bad at his job this year. He was fired so they could answer to the media and to the fans that they still care.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a done deal once all season and every pundit on every network points to Joe Burrow and the season he had and the Triple Crown and the season Jamar Chase had and said these guys would be hoisting awards at NFL honors without the defensive play. And when every conversation around the Bengals is about the defensive play, you got to fire the DC. I think that your hand was basically forced here. And the only way the Bengals kept Lou around for next season is if they did a Bengals move in terms of respect for a guy who had done so much in the past and we already have to pay him and blah, 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 blah. That's the only way they would do it. And we'd all talk ourselves into it because we've learned what to expect as Bengals fans. But this is a move that every other championship contending team would make. And we are in a championship window. We have to make these moves.
Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Again, Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. This is Off the Bench. So we'll step away for a few moments. Obviously now with a couple vacancies on this coaching staff, Zack Taylor's coaching staff, Zack Taylor going nowhere, of course. What's next? Who are some of the names that you guys are looking at as far as where we sit today? Again, it's the Monday after the regular season officially comes to a close. It's all playoffs from here, but not playoffs for the teams that we follow, of course. So now it's all off-season talk. The draft, the 17th pick belongs to the Cincinnati Bengals for the draft coming up. So there's going to be a lot of that talk over the next couple of months, of course. So lots to still talk about when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals team, no doubt. We'll step away for a few moments. Lou Anarumo out. Who could potentially be in? Who would you like to see be in to lead this defense? We'll talk about that and more when we come back. More Off the Bench next. All right, and we are back. This is Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us here. I think a lot of you are home right now. How many of you went to work? How many of you are at work right now? Whether you're at work, whether you're at home, stuck in traffic, hopefully not on the side of the road, toughing out, driving in these elements. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us this morning. Unfortunately, we're not talking about the Bengals in the playoffs. They did their part. It wasn't pretty. They did knock off the Pittsburgh Steelers Saturday night. They needed help. They did not get that help, and now we're talking about a team that's 9-8 for the second straight season. Didn't finish with a losing record, but unfortunately just on the outside looking in. Lou Anarumo out as defensive coordinator. Who could replace him? That's what we're about to dive into now. But we appreciate you tuning in, hanging out with us. If you don't mind, please help the show grow. Hit the like button down at the bottom. That helps, obviously, with the algorithm and continuing to push the show out, and we appreciate it. So, yes, like. We really appreciate you guys hanging out with us here today, nonetheless. But yeah, guys, and we're going to talk about just what that moment was like when it kind of sunk in. By the way, you guys put out the final for the playoffs, or the Bengals being eliminated from the playoffs. Because I went to the Rose Bowl this week, the wife told me I had to have a movie day with her yesterday, so I wasn't watching. So I thought the Chiefs Broncos game was done. So I posted it on Facebook, and people just destroyed me because the game's not even done yet. What are you doing? And I said, what the hell? Yeah. So I went and checked. I'm like, what the hell? I was like, maybe it was a pre-planned post that just got pushed out too early. I didn't realize it was a reverse jinx. I saw that in the comment section. But yeah,
we were still live, and Kirby decided the season was over.
So that was on me. I know I could be, I'm known as a troll from time to time, but that was not a trolling attempt. I was surprised. I'm like, I just said the season's done. What did I say that's wrong? It's true. The game's not done yet, Kenner. You're just stirring the pot. I'm like, no, I promise. I didn't know the game wasn't over. I wasn't watching football yesterday. But anyways, I hope everyone had a great weekend.
By the way, real quick shout out to the Kansas City Chiefs. I've never seen a team just completely roll over and die quite like those second stringers. I hope none of them get to the NFL. I hope none of them play as serious starters in the NFL going forward. The Kansas City Chiefs, I hope they get bounced in their first game, but we know that won't happen. But that game. I've watched pretty much just about every Sunday NFL game, at least a little bit, not fully, just a little bit of every single NFL game that's been played this season. That was the most uncompetitive game I've ever seen in my entire life. At no point did Carson Wentz show that he was a viable quarterback in this league. That defense was the worst I've ever seen, and it was capped off by the Broncos catching a touchdown pass that bounced off, I'm not kidding, Justin, three different Kansas City receivers, or three different Kansas City defensive players, and I think three different Broncos wide receivers, all in the same play. Ball bounced around everywhere. Somehow Vele caught it for a touchdown. Vel, I don't know how to say his name, but
Vele, you had it.
Unbelievably bad performance by the Kansas City Chiefs, and it is a tough way to go up, but that's what happens. That's what happens when you lose to the Patriots week one. I try to excuse the slow starts because Jacob this year said, and I hate to keep bringing that up, but I was wrong. Jacob this year said you can start 0-6 and you'd be fine with this team. And the craziest part is he's not completely wrong.
McPherson makes a kick, I'm right.
They still finished the season above 500. They still go on one of their classic end of the season winning streaks. And I saw a couple points on Twitter. I saw a couple people saying, Zack Taylor's not to blame. And then I saw someone saying, and it's an interesting take, that Zack Taylor makes sure his guys are ready to go at the end of the season. We know he doesn't get ready at the beginning of the season, but he'll be damn sure that these guys, Joe Burrow, the offense, the defense, everybody's ready to roll come the postseason. The issue is you don't get to reap those rewards if you start out the season losing to the Patriots week one. And coincidentally, that win that the Patriots had, it killed their season and it killed our season. So nobody won from that game. And all we have right now as Bengals fans is the future and hope that Zack Taylor is going to be able to get the boys ready to play week one next year. And it's up to you guys whenever you want to do the Zack Taylor thing. We know we've done it all season long. And I know Jacob did it yesterday. He did it Saturday. He's going to keep doing it until the sun burns out. But I'll do a little bit right here. Zack Taylor, though I give him credit, and I'm going to give him credit. I didn't give him credit before. I'll give him credit now. The offense looking as good as it looks, he does get some credit for that. I think the culture that we have in Cincinnati, Zack Taylor gets some credit for that. I think there are aspects to this job that he's really good at, and unfortunately, I do think there's aspects to this job that he's not so good at. I don't know why, and maybe this is my naive brain, maybe this is me not understanding football in the NFL. I still can't fathom why Zack Taylor is not responsible for the defense. I don't get that. Maybe somebody can enlighten me on it. But I know how good the offense is. And by the end of the year, the special teams unit ended up not being the worst ever. So it just came down to Evan McPherson missing kicks and Cade York. Shout out Evan McPherson. But Zack Taylor, man, I hope it changes next year. I really do. No quarterback head coach duo have won a championship after the 6-year mark, and we're approaching that now. So I hope he's able to bring in a DC that works well with him. Bring in an O-line coach that works well with him, and we're able to fix some of the, deficiencies that this team has had for years. But at the end of the day, I do think it's still Zack Taylor manning this ship, and I don't know if I fully trust him. He got to a Super Bowl. I think we were in the office last week talking about his accomplishments, and he's done more than a lot of coaches in this league. He has. But it just comes down to, are you going to be able to advance forward, progress forward, or have we seen the mountaintop? Have we gotten to as high as Zack Taylor can get? And I don't know personally. I'm a pessimist. I don't think very highly of the teams here in Cincinnati. I'm a fan of them. I love them to death. But I just know that we're cursed or something. There's some curse in Cincinnati that's preventing us from winning. Right now, that curse might be Zack Taylor. I don't know who's fully responsible. I guess I'd place a little bit more blame on Duke Tobin and everything. But Zack Taylor, your guys' thoughts as, is he going to be able to manifest a team that gets back to the Super Bowl going forward?
I think so. I've believed in Zack Taylor for a while now. I held on a lot longer than most people. Towards the end of the season, I was kind of indifferent on whether or not to keep him or let him go, though I knew the Bengals weren't going to let him go. So I talked myself into him winning a Super Bowl in Cincinnati because he's going to be the coach of this team. My thing is, when we fire Zack Taylor, what's the list of the top coaching candidates on the market? We're going to talk about it later in the show, all the guys that have been fired already this season and the names that could potentially fill those voids. Who are those names? Who are the most desirable people on the market? It's guys that call the best offenses in the league. And I know Zack Taylor's the head coach, and obviously he does have to, deal with the defense, and that's why his seat's hot next year, because the defense wasn't very good. But if the most desirable people in the entire league are the best offensive play callers, and Zack Taylor calls plays for one of the best offenses in the league, I think it would be a little bit crazy to fire him. He's the only or one of very few coaches since he took over to be to a conference championship and a Super Bowl, 2 conference championship appearances, and that means something. People in the chat and people, on Twitter and social media all the time say, well, Zach's just a product of Joe and Jamar and the elite pieces on the offense, and that's fair. You can knock him for that, but then why isn't Bill Belichick a product of Tom Brady? Why isn't Andy Reid a product of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, and even in Philadelphia, Donovan McNabb, a great quarterback? Every great coach that's ever won anything has elite talent on one or both sides of the football. And when the Bengals made it to the Super Bowl, not only did they have elite talent in Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Mixon, but they also had Jesse Bates in the secondary, who was an elite safety. And we didn't take anything away from what Lou Anarumo did during that stretch because he had an elite safety in the backfield. So I don't think it's fair to knock coaches because they have great players. I think that's something that any great coach needs to win. And I think Zack Taylor has done a really good job calling the offense. Now, if the defense doesn't improve and we're sitting here again next year at this time talking about a Bengals team who hasn't gone to the playoffs, then yeah, I'm all in on firing Zack Taylor. But I think it was a pipe dream to fire him this early. And we all knew that he was going to be the head coach of the Bengals next year. And when they got to 9-8, then that all but locked it in. So I still believe in Zack Taylor. I think Joe Burrow still believes in Zack Taylor, and that's ultimately the most important thing. After the game on Saturday, he, yet again talked about how he likes playing for Zack, how he thinks Zack has a good culture in the locker room and everything along those lines. And people can say, oh, he has to say that. He wouldn't say that if Zack wasn't his coach. Sure, I'm going to choose to believe he's telling the truth. We can say he's lying whenever we want, but we only get the bits and pieces the players are willing to tell us. And if he's going to continue time and time again to go out of his way to say that he likes playing for Zack and the culture Zack's built and having Taylor as his head coach, then I'm going to choose to believe that. And as long as Joe Burrow wants Zack Taylor to be the coach of the Bengals, I'm going to support Zack Taylor being the coach of the Bengals, because I think Joe Burrow should get the keys to this ship, and we should basically blindly follow him, hopefully to the promised land.
Yeah, I think as long as Zack Taylor has the support of Joe Burrow, then I think Zack Taylor is going to be the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. People are making so much about how unfair it is the New England Patriots to fire Mayo after one season, but the bottom line is you got to give him time to get his program going, if you will. Bottom line is the players quit on him. There's reports of the players not liking playing for it. Like it's up to the players to decide. We could say the GM and owner decide if you're employed or not, but really the players dictate that. And I think at the end of the day, to Zack Taylor's credit, this team doesn't quit on him. This team does not. If the players felt like they had a guy in that locker room that they didn't have faith or belief in, I think you would see the opposite result, where they start out hot and cool down as the season goes on. Zack Taylor has a gift of getting guys to buy in at the most important time. Imagine if he could figure out the September woes. If you fix the September woes, I think we're talking about a team that has the most wins in football over the last 3 or 4 years. That just hasn't been the case because how slow they start out. Elliot, there was I think the Friday or whatever, the last show before Christmas, it was just Jake and I, and we threw out the comparison, if you will, of Zack Taylor to Mike Tomlin. You ask anybody out there, do you want Mike Tomlin as your head coach or Zack Taylor? Everyone's going to say Mike Tomlin, but let me ask you this. Do you want a coach that starts out hot and always loses down the stretch, or do you want the head coach that starts out slow and always picks up steam down the stretch? If you look at 13-12, 4 straight losses, by the way, for the Steelers to close out this year. All right, 13-12 is the record of Mike Tomlin in the month of December since 2020. You look at Zack Taylor's record right now, he's 18-4 in the month of December since 2020. The guy doesn't lose, and he's playing at they're playing their best football at the hottest time. Obviously, it's about the full season. You need him to perform at the full season. But, I'd rather have Zack Taylor as my head coach down the stretch than Mike Tomlin, as crazy as that sounds. I wish Zack Taylor would figure it out, because if he could figure out September, we'd be talking about him as one of the top coaches in football. But we continue to doubt him because of the inconsistencies. That's been the biggest problem.
Yeah, but I think that's a testament to what goes wrong with this team every year, and it's that they don't play complementary football at large portions of this season. You don't play that complete game. You don't play that complete season. It's great that Zack Taylor finishes the season with wins every time, with winning streaks, and these 5 and 10 game winning streaks that happen at the end of each season. But at some point, when you're 1-6 or 1-5, whatever it is, on that first week of the season, that to me is coaching. That to me is Zack Taylor. I don't know if it's the players. I don't fully understand. I can't grasp why it happens so much, why they're just not ready to play week 1. And like, he changed it up this year where they did play in preseason. Like, and people were like, they should play more in preseason. You can't play more in preseason. I want them to play in preseason a little bit, But what are we risking there? We're not going to risk Joe Burrow playing 2 drives to prove some sort of point that we're ready to start each season. I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes beyond at the practices. I think this year in particular, not signing that Jamar Chase contract, I think that was detrimental to the team. I think it was a distraction that we didn't need at the time. And I think all of that goes into why the Bengals started slow this year and why they're going to start probably slow next year. I just think that's the way they are under Zack Taylor. And again, you're right. I would absolutely rather have a coach that starts slow and finishes hot, but not if it's going to cost us the playoffs. Not if it's going to be the reason. And up until this point, it had not been the reason why the Bengals were missing the playoffs. It's now the reason why the Bengals are missing the playoffs. You can't start 0-3. You can't start 4-8. It's inexcusable with the talent that you have. This is one of the best offensive seasons in NFL history. In NFL history, they're missing the playoffs. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Trey Hendrickson, Chase Brown, all these guys are going to be able to miss the postseason this year. Leader in sacks, leader in every receiving category, leader in passing. All of these things, you just don't get to miss the playoffs with that. It's inexcusable. And that's why I think moving forward, there needs to be some sort of pressure put on Zack Taylor, and I think there is. I think the firing of Lou Anarumo and Frank Pollock and all of these guys, I do think this is the start of that seat getting warm. I know everybody in Cincinnati wanted Zack Taylor fired, but Jacob is right. I mean, there is a testament to having the best offense, and that's Zack Taylor's forte. That's what he's good at. It's making the offense hum. And Kenner's right too. If Joe Burrow does not want Zack Taylor out of here, Zack Taylor's not leaving ever. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But I would like a little bit of emphasis on starting the season next season hot. I want to start next year hot in the month of September for the first time ever.
Zack Taylor's only won 1 week, 1 game, and we made it to the Super Bowl. So I think we'll know whether or not the Bengals are going to make it to the Super Bowl by week 2 next year, whether or not they can take care of business in week 1. But yeah, no, you're right. I was proven wrong. I said slow starts don't matter for the Bengals to make the playoffs because they always finish strong, and that was one of the main things that I said and why I like Zack Taylor is because he always has the guys playing their best ball at the end of the season. And then with a quarterback like Joe Burrow, I think we're going to be in the playoffs more often than not. Now, obviously, the last 2 years, last year with an asterisk, obviously, because Burrow did get hurt when he was playing some pretty dang good football after that Niners game and in a pretty good stretch there. And who knows what could have happened. But the Bengals missed the playoffs again. It's 2 years in a row. And if it happens again, like I said, then yeah, I'll change my tune. But as of right now, I'm operating on a 1 year missed playoffs because I don't know what happened last year or what would have happened last year had Joe been healthy. So I still believe in Zach. There's a lot of stats in the chat. People are saying that what you said, no one's ever won a Super Bowl in their 6th year together or past their 5th year together with a head coach and quarterback. But I'll remind everyone that it's been a long, long time, maybe the Super Bowl era, that a quarterback has won a Super Bowl after losing their first one. And Joe Burrow obviously lost his first one. So if we're just going to rely on stats to tell us what's going to happen with this team in the future, then maybe we should just move off of Joe Burrow as well, because statistically he's not going to win a Super Bowl. So I think all those stats are overplayed. We have a unique situation in Cincinnati with an elite quarterback that can do a lot of different things and a coach that, you can say whatever you want about him, but he calls a damn good offense. And people point to the losing record, and that's the first year when you're tanking for Joe Burrow and a second year when Joe Burrow tears his ACL on a pretty bad roster. So I think that record is pretty, weighted poorly in terms of how he's been as a head coach with actual talent around him. He's won 2 division championships. That went back to back. He made the playoffs and made a conference championship 2 years in a row. He has as many playoff wins as the coaches that came before him, all of them in Bengals history, 5-5. So I think when you're looking at that as well, we have to view what he's done for this city and for this team, and he's taken us to levels we haven't been at before. So that's important. But I do think we should get back to the coach that was fired, Lou Anarumo, and the potential replacements for him.
Yes, and look, we'll step away for a brief moment, and let's pick up with that. Yes, coming back to the defensive coordinator, that spot is now vacant for the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm talking about, well, how good of a job is the defensive coordinator job for the Cincinnati Bengals? And it's an interesting question And I might have an interesting spin on that, or I'll just get dunked on like I always do. We'll figure that out when we come back. More Off the Bench. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissa, Elliot Rearing when we come back. All right, and we are back. This is Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. Happy Monday. Cincinnati Bengals, they finished the regular season at 9-8 and unfortunately missed the playoffs. They needed some help over the weekend. They did not get that help. They did take care of business against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they end the regular season on a 5-game win streak. So they do take that momentum into the offseason. I guess no one's, look, it's great. You're 9-8. You didn't finish with a losing record, but when you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and the weapons you do, it's about playoffs and Super Bowls. So obviously not accomplishing those goals, there's a lot of meat left on that bone, obviously. And changes had to be made, and we knew it wasn't going to be Zack Taylor. I felt pretty confident that that was going to be the case. Whether we agreed with that or not, it didn't matter. We still believed that was going to be the case. But we knew some change was going to have to come. You can't underachieve with the weapons on this roster and not rattle the cage a little bit. And that's what the Bengals did. It was announced earlier today. Lou Anarumo, defensive coordinator after 6 seasons with the Bengals, was the defensive coordinator when they went to the Super Bowl in 2021. And honestly, you look at the numbers of the defense that year, a very average defense, but they rose, they went to that next level during that playoff run and helped propel them on that playoff run to get to that Super Bowl, of course. And we just thought that was going to continue, that those trends would continue, that, they'd get younger, more athletic, that they'd spend money on defense, and that they'd build around some of those weapons. And they just, after a couple of unsuccessful drafts and just not a lot of depth, they haven't been able to recreate some of that magic that they did back in 2021. Someone had to answer for the struggles. That's Lou Anarumo. Now the Bengals start a defensive coordinator search, and that's where we pick up right now with the show. We appreciate you guys tuning in Off the Bench. If you're hanging out with us in the chat, we appreciate you. Please hit the like button on YouTube. Again, go to Chatterbox Sports on YouTube for our Dayton listeners on ESPN Radio. Make sure you follow us on the chat. We appreciate that. So give us the like button. But guys, Lou Anarumo out. Obviously, we talked about that earlier. We knew somebody had to answer for some of the struggles, but now is an opportunity. It's always interesting when coordinators or coaches get let go. We spend time reacting to it, but then it's kind of that exciting time of the prospect and idea of what a new coordinator can do. I'm a Browns fan, as some of you guys know. Don't just hold off before punching me. I saw what Jim Schwartz, what a new coordinator could do in one offseason, and all of a sudden turn things around very quickly. Obviously, didn't have that magic this season, but last year we saw a new defensive coordinator with a lot of the same ingredients from the year before. All of a sudden, it was a completely different animal. Could that be the case with the Cincinnati Bengals? What defensive coordinators out there are you guys kind of intrigued about, and how good of a job is this defensive coordinator position for the Cincinnati Bengals in your opinion?
First and foremost, the guys that pop into my head right away for a team that I think is ready to compete, I want one of the guys that has already shown it and made their way up the ranks and been a head coach. The first couple of names that jump off the page to me, Brandon Staley, Robert Saleh, Dennis Allen. I think those 3 guys, Dennis Allen, the ex-head coach of the Saints, longtime defensive coordinator, a guy Zack Taylor wanted on his original staff in 2019 before he took the New Orleans job. So I think that's kind of my leader in the clubhouse, if you will. If I had to place my money right now, I would bet on Dennis Allen, and I would be overjoyed. But I would love either a Robert Saleh or I forget who the other name I just said. Oh, Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley, currently the passing game coordinator for the defense in San Francisco. Robert Saleh.
He's a UD guy.
Is he? Wow, that's all. Well, some ties to the state. Maybe he wants to come back. But yeah, those are all big time names. I mean, those are all huge names, and that would require you to be a desirable job to get any of the three of them to come to Cincinnati. And that's kind of what I think. I think the Bengals defensive coordinator job is not just the most desirable DC job of this cycle, but I think it's one of the most desirable defensive coordinator jobs in the history of the NFL. I think every coach that will be up for a defensive coordinator position will be lined up to interview in Cincinnati if the Browns are willing to pay. Huge caveat, huge asterisk, have to be willing to pay for a top market coordinator. But I think if the Brown family is willing to, then there's going to be a line a mile long. Everyone that coaches a defense would want to coach in Cincinnati, and you might be asking why. The Bengals have a ton of money wrapped up in the offense, and we want them to wrap more up. At least some of us want them to wrap more money up in the offense, and the defense will be, hamstringed with free agency signings. They don't have a lot of talent right now. Why would a great name want to come to Cincinnati? What was the defense ranked when they made an AFC championship and a Super Bowl? 15th and 16th. You have to be league average to win a championship in Cincinnati. How's that not desirable? All these guys at the top of the market want to win a championship, and they want to believe that they can coach any level of talent to be an elite defense. That's what it takes to be a great coach. So I don't think the level of talent currently on the roster is going to deter any of these guys from coming to Cincinnati. I think the one thing that would be a lack of commitment to improving it, and that's certainly something that we could see that deters people. But I think with the firing of Lou, 3 of the 4 coaches the Bengals just fired were under contract for next season. That's not something the Bengals normally do. They're flushing money down the drain that they're paying these guys to not coach the Bengals. That's commitment to winning. That's commitment to change. And I think the Bengals, even if they extend T. Higgins, sign T. Higgins, they're going to be willing to put some money into this defense and improve at least the floor of it and use a lot of draft capital to get some exciting pieces in here. I really want a high-level DC to take this spot, and I think they're going to be lined up a mile long too. I think this is one of the most desirable defensive coordinator positions in the history of the NFL because of Joe Burrow, because of Jamar Chase, because of maybe T. Higgins, and the floor, or I guess the level this defense has to play at in order to be a championship contender. It's so low. It's so low. And there's not another point in this league where the expectations are that low for the defense where you can still win a ring. And that's the only reason why I think the Bengals' defensive job is at the top of the line, if not one of the best ever.
See, I'm in the middle on what it could be.
Yeah.
Only because I'm curious the direction that the Bengals front office goes in as far as how they're going to financially prioritize that side of the ball. So you've heard Joe Burrow in recent weeks say, you've got to keep T. Higgins mainly because the fact that we can't continue the habit of letting players that we've drafted and developed walk out the door. I know that's an offensive side, but I was under the impression that the reason you let some of your top defensive players over the years go, like Jesse Bates and others, was because, that money is obviously being used for Burrow, for Chase, and to take care of some of your stars. But also you got to continue to draft and develop. The reason I'd be concerned is because the Bengals' inability to be able to draft over the last couple of years has been a bit of a concern. Now, is that an Anarumo thing where he hasn't been able to develop some of the pieces that were drafted? I think that's a question mark too. But if the Cincinnati Bengals, to me, if they're going to pay Jamar Chase this offseason. They're going to make him the highest paid wide receiver in football, 2 off seasons after making Joe Burrow the highest paid quarterback in football. And if they do keep T. Higgins, that means they forked over 25, 30 mil to keep him. That means to me that financially the front office is saying we are putting all of our eggs in the offensive basket financially, and whoever the DC is, you have to come in and you're going to have to rely on a very young roster every year. And I think that's a lot of pressure for a defensive coordinator to come in and have to, you have the confidence. You're going to come in saying, hey, I'm the guy for the job. And I think that could be the case. But at the same time, you want to feel confident that, hey, if I'm in a division that has the Steelers, that has TJ Watt, and the Browns, that at least as of now has Myles Garrett, and 2 teams that invest heavily into their defense, and the Ravens invest into their defense, if the Bengals aren't financially investing into their defense, that's where I would be concerned if I'm a defensive coordinator. Because, Jake, I agree with you. Any position that's open on the Bengals staff, Joe Burrow's your quarterback. You see that prolific offense, and you're right. They went to the Super Bowl. It was the 15th ranked defense in the National Football League. That's why I said earlier, it's not like they were elite throughout that year. They just raised it up a notch come playoff time. And we saw what happened when you got that complete package. I think the Bengals could be a very, very the most intriguing defensive coordinator job in football right now if they don't give that money to T. Higgins and show that they're going to financially invest on the defensive side to counter the offense. I think right now, even without T. Higgins, the Bengals offense is still explosive, and I think that you counter that with an average defense. I don't think we're talking about a team that's starting out slow. We're having to rely on a last place schedule or bad teams to get hot again. I think that this is one of the best teams in football if they do that. So I'm gonna wait and see the direction that the front office goes in as far as what they financially prioritize, because they also got this O-line. They've spent a ton in that O-line, and it still has issues. So they're going to have to use some draft capital there to fix that, or they're going to have to spend money in free agency there to fix that. And they keep T. Higgins, and they paid Jamar Chase. Trey Hendrickson's going to want money. I think the whatever the direction that front office wants to go in defensively is going to dictate, or financially is going to dictate how alluring of a job it is, at least here in 2025.
Trey Hendrickson's contracted through next season, right?
Correct.
So you don't have to pay Trey. I don't know what he'll do. Yeah. I don't know what he'll do at the end of this season. Maybe
he might threaten to retire and then play again. Oh.
The threaten to retire thing's the most insulting thing, but whatever. A couple names that I was looking, and I was reading some of Paul Dehner's stuff this morning when I heard the news. I wouldn't hate Jim Leonard. I think he's the defensive backs coach right now in Denver. What you're seeing with the Denver defense is incredible, and I know Bo Nix is there playing his tail off, but the Broncos defense has been a shining star this season. Another name, I wouldn't want it, but Eberflus. You could bring Eberflus.
I'd be pretty happy with Eberflus.
Eberflus, I think.
You just don't let him manage the clock or draft, and you're fine.
I think 3 out of 4 seasons, top 10 in scoring defense. So I think there's going to be a lot of options, and I think you're both right. I think this is the most desirable defensive coordinator job in the National Football League because what Jacob said. I'm not asking for a top 5 defense here. Nobody is, and we don't expect it either. But you just can't be last.
Yeah.
You can't be the worst defense in the NFL. It's not exactly a high bar to climb. If you're 15th and if you're the 15th ranked defense in the National Football League with Joe Burrow in this offense, it's game over for the league. It is. It's game over for the league. And I'm hoping one of these guys, my pick would be Robert Salah, but to each your own. I do think that if the Bengals moving forward are going to roll with a younger coach, I would hope that it makes sense, and I hope he pairs well with Zack Taylor. That's all I would want, really. I saw Mike Zimmer, a reunion with Mike Zimmer. Would you be interested in that?
Have we watched the Cowboys defense this year? It's one of few defenses worse than ours.
What a special defense that is.
Did Jake Gruden come back and call the offense? Just get the whole band back together.
It's probably to come down to who costs the least. So realistically, I do think that you're going to have to target one of these former head coaches that we've already talked about. I think that's the play.
That's where I reside as well. I think that would be smart, and also maybe ignite a flame a little bit under Zack Taylor's seat. Warm it up a little bit. If you have a guy that's a no-brainer interim coach, if you were to be fired mid-season, I'm not saying the Bengals are going to do that. That'd be crazy. But if it starts to go terribly next year and you have a guy like a Robert Saleh or, a Brandon Staley or a guy that's been a head coach, maybe you are a little bit more inclined to move on from your guy if you have a guy in the building that you believe in. The only other name I would throw out, and I've seen it some in the chat, they jumped me for my my under the radar lister here for defensive coordinator, but it's Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden. Notre Dame's had one of the best defenses in all of college football. Al Golden was the linebackers coach on the Bengals Super Bowl team in 2021. He has ties to the city. He has ties to Zack Taylor, and he's done a phenomenal job at Notre Dame. I don't know about going to the college ranks when we want to win right now, but I do think he's a coach that's going to be in the NFL really soon. And if you believe in him, then you can jump on that and maybe have DC for a long time. And I think that's something that we have to look at. It's a conversation we had when Zack Taylor was potentially going to be fired, and it's a conversation I think we should have with every opening on this staff. As long as Joe Burrow's the quarterback, we got to operate with the goal of having people stick together in this staff for the long term. I think we should be looking at not 1-2 year fixes at these positions. And some of those head coaches might be, or ex-head coaches might be, just because they'll get hired somewhere else. But we should be looking at someone that can be the DC of this team for a long time. We should start to try to build a staff like the Lions have. We see how great Dan Campbell's done in Detroit, and why. It's because he's had Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. I'm not taking anything away from Dan Campbell, but to have two great coordinators there for a long time together, have that level of comfortability in your offense, in your defense, I think that means a lot, and it can't be understated. That's why going out to get someone that you can build something around and have kind of be a mainstay in Cincinnati at DC for a while, that means a lot to me. And that's why I wouldn't necessarily be that mad at going out to get someone who's a little younger and can be here for the long haul.
Do you guys think the Bengals will be aggressive free agent-wise defensively? And the reason I ask that is because I think we all agree Lou Anarumo is still a very good defensive coordinator. He will not be unemployed long. Whatever team gets him, they're going to feel like they are getting a very good defensive coordinator that's coming in to turn it around. So if that's the case, if the league is telling you that that's a very good defensive coordinator and you already had him, to me that's saying it's a player issue. Why make that change? Why let go of a good defensive coordinator, still pay him, and then have to pay a new good defensive coordinator to come in and pay him at the same time? And, are you going to continue with the status quo of just, drafting and hoping that those guys pan out, getting mid-level guys in free agency? Or is this going to be, we're going to go get a legit defense, another good legit defensive coordinator, and we're going to change our tune on how we put this roster together defensively? Because I think at the end of the day, they can get Robert Saleh, they can get whoever they want defensive coordinator-wise. I just don't know how much of it was Lou Anarumo versus just their approach to letting good players go, as we've talked about for a while now, and obviously just guys not hitting on them in the draft, or maybe making decisions to go to the younger guys sooner. I don't know, but that's what I'm curious about. I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to hit defensively in the draft as well, and they're going to have to be aggressive in the free agent market. That's just going to be tough to do this year when you have so many pieces on the roster that we've spent a lot of time on talking about how they need to take care of them. Chase has to get paid. T might get paid. Hendrickson, and I agree with you guys. I don't think they have to. But if they want to avoid any kind of hiccup or distraction in the offseason, they may have to, or trade him if he's going to be, noisy. So it's not going to be an easy transition. They have some work to do, but I don't think this will just be a simple, you're our defensive coordinator, now we're going to that next level. There's going to be a lot of changes that have to be made, even their approach to the draft and how they develop as well.
Define aggressive before I tell you whether or not they're going to be aggressive.
I mean,
I'm just saying, is 5 mid-level signings aggressive, or does it have to be a $30 million guy?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, actually, because I see what you're saying. Like, I guess when people hear aggressive, it's go out and get the best defensive.
It's like they're not going to sign Max Crosby. They're not going to trade for Myles Garrett. But I think revamping that 4 or 5 guys that you bring in to change. It's a completely different recipe now with the different ingredients. So yes, I think that's more Bengal-like than going to get that Crosby as you talked about. So yes, and in that sense, I do. I think they are going to be aggressive because we can, bang on this Bengals front office as much as we want for not putting money into the team, not being financially committed. Every time in this Joe Burrow era where there's been an obvious position of need, we can complain that they haven't gotten the top market guy, but they've gotten somebody. They've filled every hole that the Bengals have had with effort. They went and signed Geno Stone to replace the safety. He led the league in interceptions last year. He was second in the league in interceptions last year. That's effort. They went out and got Sheldon Rankins because they were missing interior pass rush. He was one of the better interior pass rushers on the market. Didn't work out. Terrible signing. But that's effort. You go to a Super Bowl, you have a terrible O-line. Everyone yells at you to fix the O-line. They go out and get Kappa. They draft Volson. They sign Orlando Brown. They sign Ted Karras. It worked for a while. Now it's tailing off, but they tried. Every time that's been presented, they've tried. And the most successful signings in free agency have been the signings the fan base have hated the most. Trey Hendrickson was talked about as a terrible overpay because he was a Cam Jordan sack merchant in New Orleans, and now he has number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 in Bengals sack leader in history. And in the back end, it was talked about that Von Bell was going to be a bad signing off of New Orleans the first time. And obviously he worked out when we got to a Super Bowl play next to Jesse Bates. He was great. And then DJ Reader was almost unanimously viewed as an overpay for a true nose tackle. And then we're all complaining when we let him walk because he means so much to Cincinnati. I think this offseason is going to be viewed as relative failure. Maybe failure is the wrong word, but fans aren't going to be very excited by the signings I think that we make in the offseason. No one's going to we're not going to go get a big name. There's not going to be what everyone wants us to do in terms of having a lot of confidence going into next season, but we're going to have a lot of those mid-level signings, and if 2 or 3 of them work out, this team's in the playoffs and maybe in a conference championship again. So I'm going to hold my reservations on this offseason until I see the players play. I jumped in too quick on Geno Stone and Sheldon Rankins last year. I'm not going to do that this go-round. I'm going to wait to see him on the field first. But I have faith in this Bengals front office to at least get bodies out there that have a higher floor than the pieces they ran out to start this season this year.
I think one of the bigger questions we had this year was, and we talked about it already on the show, is was it a defensive scheme issue, or were these guys just not very good? I think what happened was I agree with Jacob. I think they tried, and I think they missed. I think they swung, and I think they struck out. Sheldon Rankins ended his season with a mystery illness. Nobody knows what happened. Geno Stone, truly one of the worst players I've ever seen play football. And that's coming after the year with Nick Scott. So I think next year they're going to try. I think they're going to make the effort. They wouldn't be firing Lou Anarumo right now and Frank Pollock if they weren't going to try to make effort next season. The Bengals franchise, I know I said it at some points during this year that they're the Bungles, right? They're going to go back to the old way of doing things. I don't think that's in them anymore. I do think that the losing might still keep happening, but that's just how I am as a Bengals fan. That's just what I see every single week. But saying that, I do think that the way this organization is being run is different than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They're going to go try to make a splash in free agency. Kinner's right. They do have to go pay Jamar Chase. That should be, honestly, priority number one. Yeah. As crazy as it is, we know defensively what happened this year, but Jamar Chase is a Triple Crown winner in the NFL. And the fact that he's not locked up, and the fact that you made that whole big show before the season to not lock him up, that's the part of me that says Bungles, Bungles, Bungles. But we'll see. We'll see going into next season. What happens. We have a couple super chats while everybody's here. A couple super chats as this segment winds down. Michael Rolfe. Actually, I can only read one super chat.
Yeah, just one. We love you, Justin Edgell. Thank you for the super chat.
Justin Edgell, $2 super chat for something I can't read on air.
It's snowing outside.
Michael, it is. That's what he said.
A lot of snow
snowing outside. Michael Rolfe, I would love for Dan Pitcher to be given play calling duties and for Zack Taylor to reallocate his time evenly across all 3 phases of the team. And geez Louise, please, Zack Taylor, focus on clock management. I agree with that 1,000,000%. I said at the beginning of the show, I don't know why Zack Taylor gets the pass with the defense. If somebody could explain that to me, great. If not, I'm just going to assume that he's doing 1/3 of his job. The offense is great, and it is. He's doing what they brought him in to do. But when you're a head coach, I do think you have to pay attention to the defense a little bit. And it's clear that this year the defense wasn't taken care of, whether that's on Lou, whether that's on Zach, whether that's on Duke Tobin. It's on somebody, and it was Lou who got the axe because of it. So we'll see what's addressed next year and how we change things. But it's still going to be Zack Taylor's offense. And if there's any solace in that, that's a good thing because the offense is incredible.
Last thing on the personnel versus scheme and development debate here on Luan Anarumo. Colin Will puts it in the chat, and it's exactly what the last thing I wanted to bring up on Lou was. 8 of the last 10 top 100 picks for the Bengals were on defense. We've talked about a lot how pitiful the draft has been in terms of hits versus misses on those premier picks. 8 of the last 10 in the top 100 on defense. Lou Anarumo hasn't progressed any of them to a level where we're excited about them for the future. We're talking about extending T. Higgins, and I've come all the way around on it because I don't think there's another player on this roster right now that warrants a big money extension. At least I'm not confident in anyone getting to that point in their career, so I'm saying why not just, extend the guys that are good enough. If Cam Taylor-Britt had taken the step we expected him to take this year, then maybe it's a different conversation. If Miles Murphy had progressed the way we expected him to after taking him in the first round, maybe it's a different conversation. But the fact that Lou Anarumo not only just had one above average season or above midway season as a defensive coordinator in Cincinnati, but he also didn't develop any young guy, young guy to a point where we're confident in him being a cornerstone piece of this defense for the long haul here. And I think ultimately that partially does him in as well. Not only was he not confident enough to play them and get them the reps, but he didn't do enough in practice to get to a point where you can use those guys you spent premier picks on. So I think it's more than just calling defenses. Lou's going to get hired somewhere quickly, and people in the chat saying then that's how you know you messed up is if your coach gets hired somewhere else. I would argue the message is stale. And if he goes somewhere else with talent and a willingness to invest and he gets great talent, he's going to be a great DC. But if he goes somewhere with less than great talent, he's going to be league average or worse like we saw in Cincinnati. So we'll have to keep that in mind as well as we view Lou moving forward.
Yeah, I think the message getting stale thing is a good point. I think it was the right decision to move on from Lou. I don't think, even if Lou goes somewhere and leads the best defense in the NFL, I don't think it's going to be one of those where I'm like, man, Bengals, see what you had. I think it was time to go. You had to move on from somebody.
Yeah.
And if you want to scream louder that person should have been Zack, that's a separate conversation that we've had a million times. But I think we all knew that, okay, based on what we know and how they operate, we knew it wasn't going to be Zack. Someone's head had to roll. Dan Pitcher, why would you do? He didn't do anything. So it had to be obviously the defensive coordinator, and you couldn't just move on for the O-line coach and that be the only head that rolls after a season of underachieving like this one. So, all right, let's step away for a few moments. Let me ask you guys this. When we come back, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that for the remainder of the Joe Burrow era in Cincinnati, how confident are you that this is the last time we have to talk about the Bengals missing the playoffs in the Joe Burrow era? You guys can respond to that when we come back. We're off the bench when we come back. All right, and we are back. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. This is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Obviously, everyone's snowed in. I'm a dummy and try to tough out the drive into my office today. And so our office, you guys haven't been here, but you have to go down a hill. You're very familiar with the hill, Elliot. But you have to go down this hill, and I've already been contacted by the people that basically plow our parking lot that, hey, it's tough to get up that hill, so be careful. So I'm really, I wanted to try out the 4-wheel drive on the new truck this winter, and I got down the hill. We'll find out how getting up the hill is going to work out shortly. So nonetheless, but
I would hate. I'll tell you what. My beautiful Chevy Impala. I'm glad I got a new car for this winter, because there is a 0.0% chance that thing should have been street legal in these conditions outside. So I'm glad I don't have my 2003 beautiful Chevy Impala anymore. I'm glad that's gone.
Was it just slip sliding all the way down the road? Fishtail the whole way?
Oh, Jacob, you talk about a fishtail. I mean, it would just spin. It would spin in circles, that beautiful beast. R.I.P.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. in peace. There you go. All right, Bengals out of the playoffs, 9-8, finished the regular season. Back-to-back seasons finishing 9-8. Unfortunately, back-to-back seasons not making the postseason. Last year, you guys talked about it. It was a surprise that they finished above 500 when you lose Joe Burrow for the back half of the season. They finished 9-8, a solid finish to a season where you lose your star quarterback and had to battle through the slow start. Not a bad year. I think that's why not many. No, I do believe that finish almost hurt the Bengals this season, because I don't think it added that urgency to the front office heading into the offseason. And I'm not saying there should have been, because I'm not even a Bengals fan, and even I sat back and said they're not that far off. If Joe Burrow doesn't get hurt, they finished 9-8 with Joe Burrow missing the last 9 games, whatever it was of the season. If he doesn't get hurt, I'm really curious what their record is, and they're going on a run in the playoffs the way we saw them the previous 2 years. So I understood why there wasn't a lot of urgency to go go all out with bolstering this roster. I think they felt pretty confident in the roster that they had. And at the time, it did seem like they had a good draft. There was a lot of good pieces that they got in the draft. And I think a lot of people, critics, non-fans, and fans all felt that they added some guys that were going to make a difference. Obviously, it wasn't enough of a difference this season. But this is back-to-back seasons where the Bengals missed the postseason, and it just seems odd. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, they don't miss the playoffs. I think Lamar's missed once, and it was an injury-riddled season like last year for Joe Burrow. Those guys don't miss the postseason. This isn't all an indictment on Burrow. It's not his fault they missed the playoffs this year when you look at the season he had. But 3 of the 5 years he's been in the league, they've missed it. It just seems weird constantly talking about Burrow and the Bengals not in the playoffs during this little era here. You look at the remainder of the Joe Burrow era in Cincinnati. I'm curious your guys' thoughts on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you that this is the last offseason, or this is the last season, or the last time that we're talking about Joe Burrow and the Bengals not playing deep into January?
It's hard for me to be confident, if that's the word. I would say I'm not confident that it's going to be the last time that Joe Burrow misses in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform, because you don't know, and I don't want to bring this up, but the fact of the matter is, Patrick Mahomes, one of the X factors there is the guy doesn't get hurt. He's always available to play football. Joe Burrow has been hurt in his career, and my confidence in Joe Burrow being 100% healthy for the next 5 years, they're not very high. I think Joe Burrow, when he's healthy, is a top 2 quarterback in the National Football League. And you saw it this season. And borderline, he should have been MVP. But the fact of the matter is, there's so much more that goes on. It's not basketball. It's not baseball. It's you need 22 guys out there, including special teams as well. And so many things have to go your way. And for that to happen here in Cincinnati, I haven't really seen it. Even when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl, right? Joe Burrow survived being sacked 7 times a game. The Bengals got to the Super Bowl despite one of the world's worst offensive line units. I don't think the Bengals will have one of the best offensive lines, one of the best defenses, one of the best kickers, one of the best wide receiving groups, quarterbacks. I don't think they'll have them all. It just comes down to how many do you need to make the playoffs. And if I'm going to be completely honest, you don't need that many to make the playoffs in the NFL anymore. You get 7 teams from a side. This year was one of the worst seasons maybe ever in terms of, wins, losses in the AFC. So many teams eliminated before the last 3 weeks of the season. So many teams, and the Bengals being unable to do that this year scares me quite a bit. It scares me quite a bit because the bar wasn't high. 10 games is usually the metric to get into the playoffs now. If you win 10, you're in. Very rarely will a 10-win team not make the playoffs with the current, 7-team-a-side format. I'm going to say I'm more confident than ever that the Bengals are going to make adjustments, and this is going to put pressure on them. Because I did agree with you, Kinner, that I was worried that the Bengals front office, Mike Brown, everybody, they would take a 9-8 season and they would justify what happened this year. Despite everything, we got to 9-8. We fought hard. We finished this year. The expectations aren't that anymore. The expectations are not the postseason. They're not making the 7 seed while having 2 teams miraculously lose on the final Sunday. That's not the expectation. Our expectation is to go to the AFC Championship game. And to be quite honest, that's what it should be when you have a top 5 quarterback. I think our good friend Reed Mouse, he always says that if you have the quarterback, you have everything. In the Bengals not making the playoffs twice in a row, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work out for me. I'm not confident the Bengals are going to be some different organization going forward. I think they're going to continue to do the same things that they have been. And the difference is we now need them to hit in the draft. We need them to hit on defensive players. We need them to go out and make moves, sign guys. And you need to build at least that culture that you already have. You need to build it up again. Pay Jamar Chase. I'd personally pay T. Higgins because at this point we know what we have with the wide receiving room. That's not T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and I don't love it. So there's, I think though they are a different organization than they've been in years past. I do think the old bungles creep in from time to time, and I'm not going to give them this infinite reign of making the playoffs with Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I wish I could be more optimistic. If you asked me After we lost the Super Bowl, I would have given you a hard yes at a much bigger window. But right now, yeah, I'm not entirely optimistic the Bengals are going to be a perennial playoff team. I do fully expect them to be back more than they're not. I think if Joe Burrow stays healthy, it would change my tune here. But as Elliot just said, we've learned that we can't rely on that. So this is a Joe Burrow injury answer, not a Zack Taylor coaching staff roster answer. I just don't have the faith that if I believe, as I do, that Joe Burrow will be in Cincinnati for the rest of his career and not just the rest of this contract, I think that's way too long for the Bengals to continue to make the playoffs. And not that they won't screw one up here or there, but I assume that another injury will come at some point, or maybe even a year where 10 wins isn't good enough to get you in. So I don't know what it would be, but I would comfortably bet against the Bengals missing the playoffs at least one more time in Joe Burrow's tenure. And if he's healthy, I think it'd be a struggle, though. I think this year, though they did finish 9-8, though they did finish with a 5-game win streak, they already made changes we didn't necessarily expect him to make, at least not on this timeline. So they recognize that stuff has to change, that this isn't acceptable, that when you have a quarterback playing this well, a receiver playing this well, an edge rusher playing this well, you have to make the playoffs. No team's ever had the passing yards, the receiving yards, and the sacks leader in the same season. The Bengals just did it, and they're sitting at home. So they know this is unacceptable. They know that this outcome's not going to be, just, well, we'll move on to next year by the fans and everyone else in this city. They're going to have to lock in and make some changes, and we've already seen that they're willing to, and hopefully that continues as the offseason progresses, because if they go into next year without changes, then yeah, they will miss it again. But I have faith, and we've already seen in a little bit, that the Bengals are not going to be the Bungles anymore. I think last year, Jake Browning getting them to 9-8, what some, including myself, consider Zack Taylor's best coaching job in Cincinnati, to adapt that offense to Jake Browning and scratch and claw to a 9-8 record. I think that was incredibly impressive, and I think that was a scapegoat for Cincinnati in the front office. They think we're 9-8, we're this close to the playoffs with Jake Browning, drop Joe Burrow in there, bang, we're a playoff team. Didn't work out like that, and now they understand that they have to make changes to the roster. And people are saying the stadium was still full at the end of the year. Why would the front office make change if you're still putting money in their pockets? I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that sentiment if they didn't have $500,000 or $500 million locked up in a quarterback. And you're going to get up to $120 million a year locked up in 3 players if you lock up T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. So you're financially committed to winning now. You are. You don't put that much money in unless you're trying to win.
That's the other thing too. I do think people underestimate. Mike Brown has been historically cheap. I will say paying Joe Burrow the money that he's getting paid, $55 million a year, I do think he cares about his investments. Right. I don't know if he cares about, the product on the field per se, but the product on the field is now a part of his massive investment.
For the first time ever. Even the Andy Dalton era, there was never this much money tied up in star players. They were never even really star players. I mean, A.J. Green, Geno Atkins, Andrew Whitworth, obviously top of their position, but those contracts were nowhere near where the top of the contracts for those positions are today.
And I think they care about, their dollar. And if their dollar is being wasted on Joe Burrow, I think they're going to be upset. That's why I do think that that they are going to make an effort going forward to limit the missed playoffs. I think to say they don't care about winning, losing, you can say that, but without question they care about where their money goes, and their money right now is all in Joe Burrow, and they're going to try to make that worth it. So we'll see going forward, but if am I confident? Not really. I think Patrick Mahomes has missed the Super Bowl twice in his career. Joe Burrow's missed the playoffs now 3 times. I granted 2 because of injury. So I'm not naive in that. I just, there's every other top 5 quarterback out there, barring injury, they're going to make the playoffs and they're going to make a deep run usually. So we'll see if it changes next year. I'm hoping there's enough organizational change. At least in terms of beginning of the season philosophies, where we need to get out to that hot start, need to win, prioritize winning early in the season so you don't have to go on these miracle winning streaks down the stretch. But if we can balance it out a little bit, then yeah, I do think the Bengals are going to be pretty damn successful. Marvin Lewis was able to get, Andy Dalton into the playoffs I don't know how many times in a row. So there's certainly the path that Joe Burrow doesn't miss another postseason. I would say, for me, I would not bet on it, but I do think it's there.
There's your defensive coordinator right there, a little Marvin Lewis. You reunite, little ML, huh? Not money line. Marvin Lewis. We're going to go Marvin Lewis reuniting at least as defensive coordinator. There you go.
That'd be something. That'd be something.
You look how long it took to get rid of him the first time. He ain't going anywhere if you get him back in for a second time. So
yeah.
All right, we'll step away for a few moments. We'll pick up with this Bengals conversation when we come back. We'll talk about what's ahead. Obviously, they have to fill this defensive coordinator vacancy, obviously, but we'll wrap up the bow on the Bengals conversation when we come back. More Off the Bench next. All right, and we are back. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. This is Off the Bench presented.
I like that one.
By United.
That was a good
I
one.
like that one a lot.
Really good one.
That one might be my
like that
favorite
one a lot.
one.
I have a bunch of blank hotkeys up on this page. I haven't used this one in a while, so I got to go back and comb through it, see what's hot and what's not. So there you go.
I like that one. I hope they're programmed to something really funny, and instead of music, we get like someone screaming or something instead when we come into the next segment.
Like
Well, what's nice is
man.
when-
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of the Kool-Aid Man, that's who caught the interception to end the Browns season. Did you guys see that? The 500-pound lineman that intercepted.
I did see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, Michael Peters.
You could tell he's never been in that position before. He didn't know whether to fall, to run, how to fall, how to run. I mean, it was just
They asked him why he slid, and he said, "I didn't want to run that far." He said it would have been a long run.
But we welcome you back Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. I've talked a lot of Bengals today, obviously. I mean, during Dialed In with Tom and Luke and Casey, the breaking news that the Bengals moved on from Lou Anarumo. Got to give them credit, too. They didn't waste time. It was official yesterday. The season's over. They had to make that change. We've talked about who the next DC can be, what the direction of the Bengals front office is going to be, and how they, improve this roster moving forward. One thing we've talked about already, at the end of the day, it may not feel like it sucks that we're not talking about this team in the postseason because it's going to be a lot of playoff talk moving forward. That's not going to be about that team, of course. But at the end of the day, look how pissed off you guys were all season. You come in and do this show after wins, and I'm like, man, did they lose? What's going on? What's happening? This was a miserable season. This team greatly underachieved. And obviously a last place schedule helped catapult them over the top to give them a shot down the stretch, which they took advantage of that as they should have. It just didn't work out. But I do honestly think, as miserable as you guys were, even making the playoffs, you just said it a little bit ago, Elliot, it would have bailed them out. I think missing the playoffs, no one aims to not make the playoffs, and you weren't rooting for this team to not make the playoffs heading into this past weekend. But I truly believe at the end of the day, the best thing that could have happened to this organization is missing the playoffs this year, because based on how this front office is operated, if they would have made the playoffs, you look at the win streak down the stretch, how much of this is the defense truly improving? How much of it was the team getting it right down the stretch? Or go look at the lineup of teams they played. I know the Steelers are a playoff team, but that's a bad football team right now. The Steelers are the worst playoff team right now as we head into this. That's not a good football team. So I'm not diminishing what the Bengals have done, but at the same time, you got to wonder, you don't want to fall for fool's gold. How much of that win streak down the stretch was fool's gold in regards to, oh, see, we don't have that many deficiencies that we have to address this offseason. I do believe when Joe Burrow played every game this season, missing the playoffs, when that's the case, I think that right there is a come to Jesus moment for this front office, a wake-up call. Elliot, I liked your point earlier. You're wasting money. If you're paying Joe Burrow all that money, and it wasn't on him this year, I get that, but you're paying him all that money and you're not in the postseason, that's wasted money down the drain. Like, you have to maximize those dollars being spent. And that's not a shot at Burrow. I'm just saying, like, this is a wasted season. What do you have to show for this great season, the Triple Crown with Jamar Chase, the great season from T when he was out there? Joe Burrow lights out this year, the best season he's had in his early career here. What do you have to show for it? Nothing. This is the rock bottom I think this front office needed, because I think every year they have found an excuse to drag their feet and not be as aggressive as they should be in the offseason. To their credit, they were aggressive with that O-line. It hasn't worked out, but we can't say they didn't try. They spent a lot of money on that O-line. They went out and got Orlando Brown Jr. They got some good, Kappa. They've addressed that over the years. But overall, they've always left meat on the bone, and they've always just attributed it to, well, look how good we were down the stretch. It's the what have you done for me lately? Well, when you look at the Bengals, what have you done for me lately? They're really good in December. So your lasting memory as Bengals fans every year, as I said earlier, Zack Taylor's 18-4 in the month of December since 2020. That's a hell of a record. So the lasting memory you have of whether this team makes the playoffs or not is a team that's playing great football. You don't feel as bad about this season now with how good they've played, 5 straight wins. I just hope that's not going to trick the front office into not feeling that urgency. I think missing the playoffs does increase that urgency. They have to address issues. They have to be aggressive, and they can't continue operating as is the way they've done during the first 5 years of this Joe Burrow era.
You're right. And the only reason people are worried about the Bengals' future with Joe Burrow at quarterback is because they're the Bengals. If Joe Burrow is the quarterback of any other franchise in the entire NFL, with the exception of, obviously one or two, probably with the exception of yours as well, Kidder, and Chicago and a few others, you would be checking off a box right now. Yes, Joe Burrow will win a Super Bowl in his career, because we would have the utmost confidence that the front office will give them whatever they need, the star quarterback, whatever they need in order to win a Super Bowl. Because once you commit the money to that guy at top market value, you have to commit to winning, because you can't make that money back on ticket sales and jerseys once you sign a $500 million contract to your quarterback. You just can't. You have to win games. You have to get to a Super Bowl. You have to try. And I think that, coupled with Mike Brown's age, gives me some confidence that the Bengals are going to try to win. And like I said last segment, this is the first step. And for the longest time, I said the first step for what the Bengals are going to be in the future was going to be cutting guys, because I thought that was going to come before the Lou firing. But they messed up my timeline a little bit, but I'm still all on board. I think this offseason is going to tell you exactly, to a T, how Joe Burrow's career in Cincinnati will go. There will be no deviation from this offseason, because he can't play better, and the expectations couldn't be further from the reality. So if the Bengals front office doesn't wake up this year and put pieces around him, invest in the defense, start changing their draft philosophy, hell, I hope they hire scouts by next season. That's the thing I want most. Hire a scouting department. How hard is that? There's 62 teams in the MLB and the NFL. One of them doesn't have a scouting department, and it's the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's just absolutely unbelievable that they continue to operate this way, and that's why they've hit so few in the draft and free agency. Who knows what the excuse is for that, but we know Duke Tobin's not going anywhere. I just hope the Bengals are willing to take swings. We can complain about the misses as much as we want, but if the Bengals aren't taking swings, I'll be much more mad than if they're striking out. So hopefully they're standing in the box and taking some hacks this offseason. We're going to have upwards of $100 million in cap space, picking 17th in the draft. Obviously, you don't want to be picking 17th. That's draft purgatory. But $100 million in free agency with your wide receiver 1 and potentially 2 locked up, your quarterback locked up, and your edge rusher locked up at least for next year. I'm pretty confident in the Bengals' ability to change this roster, and I'm pretty confident in Mike Brown's willingness too. But this offseason is going to tell us all we need to know.
Let me ask you this. Would you have rather the Bengals, when the Bengals lost to the Steelers the first time, they lost, 44-38, something outrageous. When you lose that game and you're 4-8 and you're staring at the rest of the season, Jacob and I were probably on the forefront of saying just bench everybody, quit, give up, we'll get a better draft pick. Looking at how this season ended, and it ended at heartbreak. We were one team away If I'd venture to say if the Chiefs weren't playing, if they were playing for that number 1 seed come yesterday, I think the Chiefs win that game, and I think the Bengals get in. Saying all that, looking back, do you respect it? Do you feel like it was a success? Not a success. That's the wrong word. Would you have rather them done what they did, which is fight until the end, go on a 5-game winning streak, and give you hope, or would you have rather sat down and died after losing to the Steelers? Because I go back and forth on it, and I do believe if you would have told me when the Bengals were 4-8 that they'd win out and they'd have a chance, I'd take it every time. I really would. I'd take it every time. I commend them down the stretch. I think Kinner makes a fair amount of points regarding, does it give him an excuse? Does it give him a free pass? I think they know. I think they know that this isn't a free pass. I think they know that this 9-8 is drastically different than last year's 9-8. I think that you're seeing now the world, and that world being the media and everybody else, now starting to zero in on the Bengals. Last year, again, when your quarterback goes down, there's nothing really anybody can do. If you make the playoffs, great. If you don't, great. It's a wash. This year, you're going to see this offseason have a lot of eyeballs on the Cincinnati Bengals, and I don't think the Bengals are going to want to be the joke that they were in years past. I think they're going to want to be a serious organization, and I think they're going to want to be one that is held in high regard. So I do think winning down the stretch shows that there is culture in Cincinnati, that there are a bunch of guys that like each other, that have respect for each other, that have a desire to win here. Because I think there's some franchises that would have quit then. I think the New York Jets quit on their season. I think there are other franchises this year that openly and honestly quit on their season. The Cleveland Browns. I think go around the league, there's like 10 different franchises that quit this year. The Bengals didn't do that. They didn't roll over. And maybe it's because they knew they had the talent and they were underperforming all year, but it shows me something. It shows me something that there's going to be life, and that the Browns and whoever else is in charge, that they're going to make decisions this offseason for the betterment of the franchise, and they're going to try to win, and they're going to at least do what Jacob said and swing the bat. Because as we all know, as fans of the Cincinnati Reds, when you don't swing the bat, it is the most maddening thing in the world.
Right.
It is frustrating. It's heartbreaking to watch a franchise and ownership group that doesn't care. So I'm hoping that, and I'm not even hoping, I know that the Brown family and everybody else, Duke Tobin, I think they're at least going to try. It might not work out, but they're going to try this offseason to make the Bengals as respectable as possible heading into 2025.
And now that it's all said and done, it's that time. It's the draft. It's time for the draft. And we have all of January, all of February, all of March, and some of April. It's Jacob's time to shine.
I'm up to the mid 60s. I think I was at 63 today, this morning, on my big board. So we're getting there. I'm hoping for a full top 100 by the time the playoff ends, and then we can start college football playoff, that is, ends, and then we can start talking draft. Yeah, Bengals picking 17th, and obviously not where you want to pick in the draft. That's the worst couple picks, 15 to 18, worst possible place to pick in the draft, because that means you just missed the playoffs, and you're not going to get a blue chip talent. But Elliot, this is going to go against stuff I've been saying all year long, but what would this show be without a couple contradictions, right? I think the last 5 wins were absolutely crucial to Zack Taylor, because I don't know how good of a coach he is out of a culture guy. And if you don't win out and you don't finish with a respectable record, what does he have? I know we can point to play calling, and people always want to, downgrade his play calling because of the quarterback we have and the wide receivers we have, and that's fine. And I already said my piece that I think every coach is a benefit of the star players on their roster, and if you're going to, eliminate them, then you got to do it for everyone that's good in the NFL. But Zack Taylor's main thing, you say it all the time. What does he throw the best? Pizza parties. He's a pizza party coach. That's right. And if you end the season giving up, tucking your tail, laying down, and dying after losing to the Steelers instead of scratching and clawing, and I'm sure the guys were all together yesterday in the facility watching the first quarter of those games before we knew it was over, and that means something. That means something going into next year. That means something in the locker room. I know Joe didn't exactly look overjoyed when the game ended with a win, and you obviously can't celebrate it a ton because you had so much that had to happen in order for you to get into the playoffs. You wish it could have meant more. Winning in Pittsburgh always feels nice. You wish it could have meant a little bit more and been able to sneak into the playoffs. But I think these 5 wins, though it tanks draft position, and right now that's really the only thing it got us, I think it means a lot for the future. This team didn't give up. Zack Taylor didn't have a group quit on him. And we kill coaches all the time for having their locker room give up in the middle of the season when your math gets hard to get into the playoffs. And I think it's important then on the other side of that to give Zack Taylor credit for keeping these guys together, because Super Bowl aspirations in the preseason, top 5 in odds, starting off 2-4. And winning out 4-8, and then winning out to go 9-8. It's just, it really is unbelievable that he was able to stick together and scratch and claw. I know it didn't result in a playoff berth, but there's plenty of coaches that we rank ahead of Zack Taylor that wouldn't have kept the locker room together during that stretch. And now we can debate whether or not culture matters or whether you just have a great X and O's head coach. But I think at least in this conversation, it's a big, big positive for Zack Taylor that they were able to stick together.
Do you think that it changed? Do you think, real quick, I'm sorry, Justin, do you think it changed his fate? Do you think, because I now believe that if the Bengals would have, let's say the Bengals win 6 games this year, I think it would have been it. I firmly believe now that Zack Taylor would have been fired had the Bengals not done what they did at the end.
With the speed of the Lou Anarumo firing, it tells me that the playoffs, I don't even think were going to save his job. Maybe I'm wrong, and a couple playoff wins certainly does change that. But I think if the Bengals had the ball bounce their way yesterday in the late slate and you get in and you get ran out by Buffalo, I don't think that changes Lou Anarumo's fate. Not with the speed in which that happened. He was gone, and that was decided. And I think you're absolutely right. If Zack Taylor wouldn't have ended the season strong, if the team wouldn't have ended the season strong, and the third one that is so big, and I know I talk about it a lot, and people are probably annoyed with it, but if Joe Burrow wouldn't sit up there and say he likes playing for Zack Taylor every single week, Zack Taylor would be gone. That's the biggest thing keeping him here. A strong start, a good culture, and your star players having your back.
Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. We wrap up the radio side of this for our listeners in Dayton on 1410 ESPN Radio. More Off the Bench when we come back. All right, and we are back. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. This is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. We come at you live every weekday from 10 a.m. to noon on Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. And then if you live in the Dayton area, 1410 ESPN Radio, Wing AM, of course. That's where you could hang out with us there as well. That re-airs from 1 to 3 o'clock in Dayton, and we'll have that for you coming up here today. Everyone's snowed in. A little snow day. Love snow days.
Yeah.
And then we get to continue on. Do you guys have a little box lunch coming up after the show today?
We do. We'll hold it down from the basement. Elliot and I will give you a box lunch for all of our members. If you're tuning in for the first time, welcome in to Off the Bench and become a member. Go join the program here at Chatterbox. We do box lunch, members only show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's always a good time in there. So we'll have that coming up shortly after this one, probably about 12:15, 12:20 for all the members here on Chatterbox.
And make sure you hit the like
Man,
button if you're available. If you're watching right now on YouTube, hit that like button. Helps our algorithm out a little bit. Comment in the chat. Comment after the show. Just help the show out. So thank you guys for tuning in. It's honestly, it's crazy. Our most viewed show of the year,
The Obituary.
This Bengals is the season-ending show where we declare the Bengals dead and we move on to the 2025 season. So thank you guys for tuning in.
So we've gone back to this bit quite a few times, but I'm telling you what, I mean, I feel like a lot of you should still really like my draft take at this point, because if Kinner's draft existed, with the second pick in the 2025 NFL draft, the Cincinnati Bengals would select
Abdul Carter.
Yeah. So that's why I'm laughing. I'm looking at this. I'm like, the Bengals would have the Seattle Seahawks. How about that, by the way? You finished 10-7 and missed the playoffs. 10-7, the Seahawks, they missed the playoffs, but they would have the number one. So I've said that the first team that misses the playoffs should get the number one overall draft pick. You know, they fought all season. They didn't quit. The Browns quit. You had a lot of teams who benched their starters and weren't trying. I hate that. I'm tired of awarding losing, right? Like, stop rewarding losing and reward those who try to win. The Seattle Seahawks, the Bengals, they fought all season to compete for a playoff spot, and now they're picking 17th and 18th or whatever. Like, you're not going to reward them for trying and trying to win throughout the entire season. But the Browns, who purposely, by the way, that's what drives me nuts about that Brian Flores thing a few years ago. Everyone acting like, oh no, we weren't tanking. No one tanks in the NFL. We literally just watched it. We watched the Chiefs tank yesterday. Well, the Browns have been tanking for weeks. Like, that's what this does. When you incentivize losing, tanking exists, and we watched it. I hate it. That's why I said, hey, the number one pick should go to the first team that missed the playoffs. Start the draft order there. Well, how do the teams at the bottom get better? Well, force those guys to spend money and get better players on their roster and compete until the very end. That's how you do it. We don't need to go back into all of that. But I did get a kick out of the fact that, of course,
back-to-back years,
dunking on me, your team would benefit greatly. Yes, you're right. Your team would benefit greatly from it.
Yeah, we wouldn't even be debating extending T. Higgins because we'd have Marvin Harrison.
Yes.
Let me ask you guys this. I saw this was a talking point yesterday. Do you think teams who are in that last week of the season who've already clinched their playoff spot, do you think it's fair, or do you think it's punishable that they don't, like the Chiefs yesterday? What they did to the sport of football, I think, was a disgrace. I think if I would, like, they should have Andy Reid should have came out before the game and said, I forfeit. If that's what was going to happen, I do believe he should have done that, because I think it's one thing if you have like a couple backups and you're trying to win. Still, they weren't trying to win yesterday. That was a team who had legitimately moved on to the postseason, and good for them.
If given the opportunity, right? Do you think they would have forfeited that game and just not played it?
I don't know why you wouldn't.
Right?
I don't. I honestly, God, what's the benefit of being out there? Why waste everybody's time? There is none. There was absolutely no reason for that game to be played yesterday if Andy Reid and the Chiefs knew that they were legit going to sit on their hands and pout, as maybe not even pout's not the right word, sit on their hands and quit while the rest of us pout. But I do think I'll say this. The Bengals are solely to blame for the Bengals not making the playoffs. 1,000,000%.
Correct.
It's Zack Taylor. It's everybody's fault in the Bengals organization as to why the Bengals didn't make the playoffs. So I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm mad at the Kansas City Chiefs for disgracing the game of football yesterday against the Broncos. I will say this: I don't think it's football. I don't think it plays to the spirit of the sport when stuff like this happens, and it's been happening since as long as the playoffs and the Super Bowl era. It's been a thing for forever, but it's not football. So I would say this: like, if you're not going to try to win, just forfeit. I think that should be an option, a legitimate option. Now, it can't be an option because people are paying tickets for the games and yada yada yada. I will say, make that last game an option game. Tickets aren't available to the last moment. And you can just know if your team's going to forfeit or not, because the Chiefs yesterday forfeited that game before it started, and we all had to sit and watch it for no reason.
Now, while we're talking about tanking, and it obviously does happen, it's happened in the NFL for a long time. The Browns playing Bailey Zappi and DTR, the Giants playing 4 different quarterbacks this year. It happens everywhere, and it's happened for a while. My argument has always been that it's never a season-long thing. I don't think teams ever go into the NFL season saying we're going to tank. Obviously, a lot of teams know they're not going to be a Super Bowl contender, but I don't think tanking happens until the last 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. I think in special scenarios, maybe it's a little bit longer than that, but in most situations, we're talking about a 3 or 4 week stretch of teams not necessarily trying to win. And even in those stretches, we saw it twice this year. Back-to-back weeks, teams with the number 1 overall draft pick winning and tumbling down the board. Once, a team in the Giants with Drew Lock at quarterback who were locked in to draft their quarterback of the future, and fans were really excited about Shedeur Sanders in New York. And then the second one, the Patriots, Drake May, they were going to trade back and have a wealth of riches of draft capital. However, they win the game, fall down in the order, and now they're going to be picking in the top 5 still, but falling down. So I don't think tanking is a big enough issue in the NFL that something has to be done about it if every single year we see teams picking at the top of the draft, winning when everyone says they're not supposed to. Even just 2 years ago, last week of the season, Texans in line to draft Bryce Young, the no doubt everyone consensus number 1 overall pick, and they win in the final week of the season, bumps them down to pick 2. I think if tanking was a major problem in the NFL, we would never see that happen, because obviously the Chiefs didn't care about winning that game yesterday, but that's because they've locked up the number 1 seed in the league, in the conference, in the AFC. So, and they have home field advantage, and they're keeping guys healthy. So I don't think that's tanking. I don't think the Chiefs lost that game on purpose to keep the Bengals out. I know some people have that take. I don't think so. I think the Chiefs played their backups and lost to a playoff team playing their starters. And now you can debate the effort of said backups, and that's certainly fine, but they weren't playing NFL players out there, and they lost to a team that's going to the playoffs. So I don't know what necessarily there is to say about that. I just don't think tanking's a huge deal in the NFL, and that's why I don't think there's necessarily a change that has to be made for it.
I agree for what it's worth, but
yeah, and by the way, yesterday the biggest problem I had, maybe not so much tanking, but it's the 17th game of the regular season. Yeah, I have a huge problem with the 17th game. Like I mean, it's money that we don't need to really debate it. There's
18 soon.
No, I think this. Yeah, it's going to be even more. We're going to get 2 weeks of this. Now, to be fair, I say 2 weeks of this, but the Bengals would have had 1 extra week to try to make something happen, I guess. But, I mean, when you look at the playoff races at the bottom, are those entertaining and justifiable enough to say, hey, look at all this entertainment? Like, the Bengals might be the best team to compete for a final playoff spot since extending it to 17 and extension moving forward. I don't think they'll be as talented a team as the Bengals moving forward that is fighting for a spot like that when the AFC was as bad as it was at the bottom. I don't know. I just don't think those races were as entertaining as what many would like to argue to justify. Look at all the playoff races down the stretch. Well, there's playoff races that wrap up in week 16 too. So I think that 17th and extra game. And by the way, the Chiefs, I had no problem with what they did. I don't think they tanked because of the Bengals. I agree. I also don't think the backups did it either. Keep in mind, those backups, they're going up against the starters of the Broncos. Yeah. The Broncos trying to clinch that. They're trying to show, hey, look at my tape against the starters of a team trying to clinch a playoff spot. But the storylines write themselves for the rivalry. I had no issue with people going that direction, saying, hey, look, they were afraid of the Bengals. That's why they did this. The Chiefs knew they were screwed because that was going to be the narrative no matter what. They were going to rest those guys no matter what, but it did come across as, well, we want no part of facing Joe Burrow in the playoffs or at all. And I think they avoid them in the regular season next year, too. They might get a break of the Bengals next year, too, unless they meet in the postseason. So, Josh Allen, not so much. Not so much.
And by the way, they absolutely did the right thing. So
yeah, I saw some people debating the Saquon thing. I think we could touch on that at least a little bit. Eagles bench Saquon, locked up their seed. They were locked into the 2 seed. They don't have a bye. So getting Saquon that rest before the first round, I thought made sense. But I saw people killing Sirianni and the Eagles coaching staff and Saquon himself for not caring about the game. There's some things bigger than rest, and an all-time rushing record is about the game of football, and the Eagles were turning their nose up at that. I think that's nonsense. It's rings over records at all times, and the Eagles think they can win a Super Bowl, and they're setting themselves up the best for that.
The same
especially in that record.
I was going to say the same people complain about that. The same people complain about that will look at what Mike Evans did yesterday and call it against the game.
Right. Asterisk stat.
Football.
Anyone calling that Mike Evans 1,000-yard season an asterisk season is the dumbest person I've ever talked to. He missed 3 games. He only played 14 games. Oh, just an unbelievable stat, though, for Mike Evans. first ballot Hall of Famer, right? No question about it.
100%. 100%.
The most underrated player of our lifetime, maybe ever.
Yeah, I think so.
Up there for sure.
And if Tom Brady doesn't come there, I seriously wonder if anybody even mentions Mike Evans.
Yeah, the ring. It's crazy how a ring can change conversations.
Yeah.
Well, look. It took a Browns quarterback to keep it going, though. You know?
That's true. That's true.
Thank the Cleveland Browns. The Browns played a pivotal role in that. So, and thank you for letting me get through a whole show without making fun of the fact that my team has the number 2 pick after a glorious season. By the way,
you wanted that.
All the hip-hop.
The last 8 weeks. This is better than I even thought they were going to get.
I might be having to, I'm trying to figure out, do I buy a large Shedeur Sanders jersey or an extra large in case I gain weight? I'm trying to figure it out. Remember all the crap I've talked about him. I might become a Shedeur fan, by the way. And I would not be a fan.
It's perfect timing. It's perfect timing. That's all I got to say.
Yep. Well, we're out of time, at least on radio. We'll continue on the stream on YouTube, Chatterbox Sports. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us today. Unfortunately, the Bengals not in the playoffs, but a lot of reaction to Lou Anarumo and what's ahead for the Bengals this offseason. And we'll have more on that throughout the week. Of course, college football playoffs, the Final Four kickoff later this week. We'll have more on that this week. We'll talk Reds. We'll talk Bearcats. We'll talk about it all. But until tomorrow, this has been Off the Bench on 1410 ESPN Radio here in Dayton.